Okay, welcome to this webinar from the State Archives Collection, part of Museums of History New South Wales. My name is Colleen Milicevic, and today I will be presenting Ships, More Ships and Still More Ships, a webinar illuminating the work of the State Dockyard Newcastle. In particular, I will be featuring images from series NRS 21054, which are photographs, negatives, slides and microfilm from the State Dockyard. And these have been recently published in our catalogue. Firstly, an acknowledgement of country. I'm hosting this webinar from the lands of the Darug people, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So the State Dockyard Newcastle was officially known as the New South Wales Government Engineering and Shipbuilding Undertaking and was brought under jurisdiction by a 1943 Act of the same name. Under the Act, the State Dockyard could perform all types of engineering, including general engineering and marine engineering, shipbuilding, repairing and docking, and any other work or activity incidental to its major functions. The State Dockyard operated from 1942 to 1987, and during this time it constructed 95 vessels, repaired many hundred vessels, and completed other non-vessel related engineering works. So I should note here that although the dockyard was a New South Wales government undertaking, it did not just construct ships for the New South Wales government. Most of its clients were in fact not from New South Wales and included other government agencies and private companies. And just a note, the State Dockyard should not be confused with the Walsh Island Dockyard, which although also located in the Newcastle area, was closed in 1933 and operated from a different location. So as mentioned, the State Dockyard commenced operation in 1942 in the middle of World War II. Britain at that time was heavily reliant on shipping to provide supplies and men. But as the Battle of the Atlantic progressed, German U-boats inflicted heavy losses on British ships. And in 1940, Winston Churchill sent out a call across the seas for ships, more ships, and many more ships. As a result, William McKell, who was the New South Wales opposition leader at that time, had started pushing for the reopening of a New South Wales dockyard. And upon his election as Premier in May 1941, he approached the Australian Shipping Board for the go-ahead, which was provisionally granted. So on the 25th of August 1941, Mr. David Lyon McClarty was appointed to State Director of Engineering and Shipbuilding. And he had a strong background in shipbuilding, having worked at privately owned shipyards in both Scotland and Australia for many years. And he reported directly to the Minister for Public Works. So McClarty's first job was to re-establish a dockyard as quickly as possible, and there were thoughts of resurrecting the former Walsh Island dockyard. However, an assessment of the site was disappointing. Much of the equipment and plant had been sold off when it closed in 1933, and the site was a scene of desolation. And additionally, access to the island required constant dredging due to silt build-up in the Newcastle harbour. So it was decided instead to use the Dyke Peninsula, which you can see highlighted in green in this diagram, where there was an existing dredge repair shop that could be incorporated into the facility. So some equipment and materials from Walsh Island were salvaged and reused, and this included the floating dock, which was to be located at Carrington. And you can see its position noted towards the bottom of the diagram on the screen. And the reuse of equipment and resources from Walsh Island not only resulted in the new dockyard being established fairly quickly, but it also saved about £1 million compared to what it would have cost to build the dockyard from scratch. So let's have a look at the dockyard layout. The dockyard occupied 25 acres in total on the Dyke Peninsula, and it was designed to maximise the flow of materials and products throughout the construction process. So there were main entrance gates, which marked the entry to the facility. And in the building to the immediate right of the entrance gates, there was a moulding loft, which occupied the entire second floor of that building. And I'll talk about this facility a little bit later in the presentation. To the left, were the shipyard trades and the engineer shops. And in the distance across the water, you can actually see the city of Newcastle. So at the end of the peninsula were more workshops, and the larger building with state dockyards written on the roof comprised the blacksmith shop, the machine shop, boiler shop, electrician shop, repair shop, and a garage and plant maintenance section. The smaller buildings to the foreground housed the joiner's shop and the pattern shop. And to the bottom right of the picture is the two-story admin building where management and office-based staff were located. And finally, here we can see the 3 slipways where vessels were constructed. And you can see a vessel there in the number 2 slip, which looks like it's well underway. The smaller workshops to the right of the slipways comprised more trade shops, including painters, shipwrights, fitting out, plumbers, and coppersmiths. And these were adjacent to the fitting out wharf. And you can see a ship moored there in this photo being fitted out. There were also rail lines that ran through the shipyard and engineering shops, with branch lines to the fitting out wharf. So consideration was also given to the staff in the design, and there was a small park in front of the workshops for employees' use. There were dressing rooms and bathroom facilities around the site, and a workman's canteen nestled behind the workshops for shop employees. And we have some great photos of the canteen. It seated about 100 men and was equipped with a commercial kitchen, which you can see here on the photo on the right. And we can see that lunch is being plated up in this photo. There were canteen ladies who prepared and served the meals for the workers, and have a look at all that bread being sliced. At the top right, we can see the canteen ladies serving the men's lunch. And I have to say the gentleman seated at the front looks pretty happy with all the food he's been served. On the bottom right, we have a Mrs. Harding, who appears to have prepared some delicious pies for lunch. And it must have been a momentous task to prepare and serve all those meals, but it was essential for the men to keep their energy up, because shipbuilding involved a lot of manual labour, and it wasn't though they could just pop down to the local Macca's for lunch. So another key part of the dockyard was the floating dock, and this was essential for the docking and repairing of vessels. As mentioned, the floating dock came from the former Walsh Island dockyard. There it had operated in 2 separate sections, but for the new dockyard, the 2 sections were joined together to create a floating dock with a lifting capacity of 15,000 tonnes. And this meant it could accommodate a lot of the larger vessels. So a floating dock was more efficient than a land-based graving dock, as the flow of air through the dock resulted in the paint drying much more quickly. And here we can see the Ixion in the floating dock. The Ixion was a refrigerated cargo vessel belonging to the Blue Funnel Line. It was not built by the dockyard, but had obviously dropped in to have some maintenance or repairs completed. So what did the dockyard accomplish during its first years in World War II? Well, first, it received its first order on the 2nd of June 1942, which was from the Commonwealth Department of the Navy. And the order was for the construction and delivery of an anti-submarine and minesweeping vessel, which was named HMAS Strawn. And you can see it pictured here. The ship was named after the town of Strawn in Tasmania. So a few months later, in October 1942, the Australian Shipbuilding Board placed orders on behalf of the Small Craft Construction Directorate for 20 more vessels. And these were 120-foot twin screw cargo vessels to be built on a production line basis. Formal approval for the dockyard was not given by the Commonwealth Government until January 1943, but by then the dockyard's operations were well underway. And by the end of the war, after just 4 years of operation, 21 vessels had been constructed for the Army and Navy. 6 sets of triple expansion engines were completed, and 600 vessels had been docked and or repaired, and many of these had been heavily damaged by enemy action or collision. And great reviews were received about the quality of the work at the dockyard. In a 1944 letter from Charles Brown, who was from the United States Warshipping Administration, he said that during the past few months, several US warshipping admin vessels have been dry docked and received major repairs. And the facilities at Newcastle have been of incalculable benefit in putting our ships back into service for the war effort with minimum delay. And in another letter from Captain Rabone of the SS Admiral Chase, he said, "It was the best work I have seen in 5 years. The docking was done expeditiously and efficiently." But with the war over, the dockyard now had to shift its operations to peacetime production. So before I move on, I'll outline broad steps in shipbuilding at the time, and this will just provide some context for the images that are to follow. So I've grouped the stages into 4 key areas. There's design and planning, there's laying down and construction, there's launching and fitting out, and then there are trials and handing over. So as a first step, plans and drawings of the vessel were prepared. And these plans would include the arrangement of the vessel, including cargo, fuel and ballast, and crew and passenger accommodation. And they would be accompanied by detailed specifications of the hull and machinery. In some instances, such as with the Army and Navy vessels, plans were already available based on pre-existing templates. All ships had to meet the Lloyd's Register of Shipping rules of construction, as well as Commonwealth specifications. And on the screen, we have the general arrangement plan for the Princess of Tasmania. And as you can see, it shows a broad view of the vessel, both from the side and the top views. The Princess of Tasmania was a roll-on, roll-off passenger ferry built by the dockyard for the Commonwealth of Australia. Roll-on, roll-off means that vehicles can drive on and off the vessel. Now, every ship constructed by the State Dockyard was given a ship number, and you may see this ship number against some of the records in our collection. So the Princess of Tasmania was ship number 61. Now, once the plans had been prepared, engineers at the dockyard then drew detailed plans for use by the yard's builders and to construct detailed production schedules. Now, please note that we do hold original plans and specifications for many of the ships constructed by the dockyard. However, as the plans can be quite large and many have been stored, folded and rolled, a conservation assessment may be required before they can be issued in the reading room. And the National Archives of Australia may hold plans for any naval or army vessels constructed by the dockyard. So earlier I mentioned the moulding loft that was in the building just to the right of the main entrance gates. And the moulding loft played a very important role in the construction of the ship. It took up the whole top floor of the building. And as you can see here, it was a big open space. So in this area, the ship's design was transferred in full scale onto the lofting floor by loftsmen. And from these drawings on the floor, full-sized wooden molds and templates were made. And these would serve as guides for the cutting and shaping of the steel or wooden parts for the ship. So the loftsmen spent a lot of time crouching on the floor, first creating the drawings and then nailing in wooden molds to shape. And I can't imagine what their backs felt like at the end of the day. But the designs in these photos are for the HMAS Moresby, ship number 71, which was a survey vessel built for the Department of Navy between 1962 and 1964. Now, the next key stage was the laying down. So this was when the first section of keel was laid on the building blocks. Now, this step signified the official start of the construction process, even though fabrication of some parts may have begun earlier. So here we see the keel of the Princess of Tasmania being laid down on the 15th of November 1957. And everyone looks pretty excited to get that first bit of keel in position. Once the keel was laid, construction would progress section by section, and the various parts of the vessel were constructed either on site in the workshops or in some cases sourced externally. Now, it could take months or years for a vessel to be completed, especially if waiting on parts from external suppliers. And sometimes industrial action did delay the process. But what amazes me most is the immense proportions of these components. Each had to be lifted, maneuvered into position, and then riveted into place. And on the left here, we see a workman standing beside the bulkhead of the Kujara, ship number 59, which was a passenger cargo ship built between 1954 and 1956 for the West Australian government. Now on the right, we see the stern of the BP Enterprise, ship number 77, and it was constructed for the BP Tanker Co. between 1967 and 1968. So some really massive structures here that absolutely dwarf the workman. So once the hull was completed and watertight, the next stage was the launch. Now the launch did not mean that the ship was ready to sail away, but it was another significant moment in the construction of a ship. It was a culmination of everyone's hard work over months and years, and there was no greater satisfaction than watching a newly completed vessel sliding into the water. So in 1988, a researcher by the name of Natalie Sanderson interviewed former dockyard employee Frank Neat for a history project. And when asked what he enjoyed most about his 40 years at the dockyard, Frank said it was the launch of every ship. And here we can see the Australian Trader, ship number 79, being launched on the 17th of February 1969. Now the Australian Trader was a passenger and cargo ship built for the Commonwealth of Australia. It had taken 18 months from laying down to launch. So it must have been a big relief for everyone to see it go down the slipway. It was estimated that 1,500 people came to watch the launch on the day. And you can see employees here in the photo on the rooftops and scaffolding, and there are many people streaming into the slipway to watch the event. Launching a ship was not a simple process. The launch program involved many steps and checkpoints, both prior to the launch and on the day itself, to ensure that the launch went smoothly. Dockyard employees had to prepare the ship prior to the day, for example, by oiling the slipway. And on the day of the launch, select employees would arrive early in the morning to prepare the vessel. One forgotten step could ruin the launch. And this happened to the Australian Trader. So when the launching lever was pulled, the ship didn't move down the slipway. So someone had forgotten to pull out the launching pin. And once that was fixed, the ship slid purposefully out into the harbour to the strains of Advance Australia Fair. So each launch was a big event with much fanfare. So key dignitaries and officials were invited, including relevant government ministers, the local mayor, and the ship's owners. A ship's sponsor was chosen, and most often this was the wife of the minister or another important guest. Dockyard employees, their families, and the local community were also welcome to attend the event, and the vessel would be decorated with bunting. A flower girl would be selected to present the sponsor with flowers, and the ship would be christened by smashing a specially designed champagne bottle against the hull of the ship. Invited guests would then attend a catered luncheon after the launch, and the sponsor would also receive a gift. So pictured here is the program for the launch of the Freshwater, ship number 105, which was one of the last vessels to be constructed by the dockyard. The Freshwater was a brand new style of super ferry constructed for the New South Wales Urban Transit Authority. It could carry up to 1,200 passengers and travel at speeds of 18 knots. And it was named after Freshwater Beach on Sydney's northern beaches and is still in service today as a Manly ferry. So as you can see from the program on the screen, on the day of the launch, there were speeches, there was a blessing by a chaplain, and then the launch itself. And after the launch, the invited guests would attend a catered luncheon with further toasts to various people. So this is the blessing given at the launch of the Queenscliff, ship number 106, which was the sister ship to the Freshwater. The Queenscliff was launched just a few days after the Freshwater, and it was the last vessel constructed by the dockyard. The blessing was given by the Reverend Mainprize, an Anglican priest from the Hunter region, and he's pictured here in the background. So as I've mentioned, each ship was assigned a sponsor, usually the wife of a key dignitary or official, and she was referred to informally as the launch lady. So a bouquet would be presented to her by a flower girl, and the launch lady would make a short pre-written speech in which she named the vessel, congratulated the workmen, and called on God's protection for all who voyaged in the vessel. And you will note that the vessel was referred to in the speech as her, and this was a long-held tradition across the maritime industry to refer to vessels in the female form. And in the photo, we see the launch lady for the freshwater, Olive Cox, who was the wife of the Minister for Transport, Mr. P.F. Cox. And Mrs. Cox was presented her bouquet by flower girl Jacqueline Bartz, who had been selected for the task by a random ballot. And at the post-launch luncheon, a gift would be presented to the sponsor, which could be anything from a clock or a piece of jewellery. So as part of the launch, the sponsor would christen the ship by breaking a champagne bottle against the bow. But what if you didn't have a good throwing arm? You could muck the whole thing up in front of all those people. Well, don't worry, the State Dockyard had it covered. So here on the left, we can see how the champagne bottle was rigged with 2 ropes. The bottle was tied to one rope, which was attached to a hook on the bow of the ship. And a secondary rope would be attached to the first rope to hold it in place. So at the appropriate moment, the launching lady would cut the secondary rope, releasing the bottle, which would then swing with some momentum and smash against the bow. And this meant there would be no christening fails. So you can also see here how the bottle was specially dressed with ribbons for the occasion. And the photo on the right shows a bottle about to smash into the bow of the Cape Morton, which was ship number 69. Now, I am going to say that the photos of the launch ladies and flower girls are just fabulous, and the skirts just get shorter and shorter over time. Now, what happens after the launch? Well, the fitting out begins. So firstly, the ship would be moved to the fitting out wharf, which, if you remember from earlier in the presentation, was located near the slipways and the fitting out workshops. And here the vessel would be moored for further work. So this process included installing things such as the main and auxiliary machinery, water services, cabin furniture and fittings, and cargo gear. Colour schemes would be chosen for items such as the bulkheads, deckheads, floor coverings, and upholstery. For example, the interior of the Bass Trader, ship number 64, was painted in colours such as pastoral green fantasy, squirrel walnut, and ballerina white fantasy. And the deckheads or ceilings were finished with white formica. The upholstery on the ship was in colours such as Norfolk grey, red 21 antique, or olive green. And we can see some brilliant colours here in these photos of the Bass Trader. Now, after fitting out, extensive sea trials would take place, and this was to ensure the vessel met performance and safety standards. The trials will be conducted over several days and could include full power trials, steering and circle trials, as well as tests of navigation and other equipment. The results of each test would be fully documented, and any issues would need to be addressed before delivery of the vessel to the new owners. So on the left, we can see the BP Endeavour, ship number 76, undergoing its sea trials. And it was an oil tanker built for the BP Tanker Co. Limited. And in the image on the right, we have personnel recording the results for sea trials on the Darwin Trader, ship number 82, which was built for the Commonwealth of Australia. And finally, after all the trials have been completed, we come to the last stage of the shipbuilding process, the handing over of the vessel to the owners. And as you can see, it involved mounds of paperwork, lots of handshaking, and men in suits. So as an example of the whole process from start to finish, let's look at the Bass Trader. So this was a vehicle deck cargo vessel built for the Commonwealth of Australia. It was laid down on the 14th of September 1959. It was launched on the 3rd of December 1960 and handed over on the 4th of April 1961. But delays in the arrival of the engines and some windows from the United Kingdom extended the production schedule. Once the engines arrived, the coppersmiths worked overtime every night during the week and on Saturdays and Sundays, getting the main engines ready for turning so that 4 days of sea trials could take place. And overall, it took just over 18 months from laying down to handing over. And at the height of construction, there were 390 men working on the vessel. And this footage was taken of the Bass Trader as it commenced its sea trials. So the Bass Trader was significant because it was the first of its type in the world. It was the first roll-on, roll-off cargo ship, which could take trucks and other large vehicles. It had a capacity of 60 semi-trailers on the main deck and 22 containers on the upper deck. And it was the only merchant ship propelled by a Napier Deltic diesel engine, which was a much more compact design. And provision was made to carry a spare engine on the vehicle deck of the vessel. And it subsequently made maritime history when it became the first ship ever to change an engine while at sea. And here she is in the floating dock during March 1961, looking beautiful under the lights. And maybe this is one of the nights that the coppersmiths were working there overtime. Oh, and by the way, there were 2 vessels by the name of Bass Trader built by the dockyard, both for the Commonwealth, but the later vessel was ship number 94, and it was built between 1974 and 1976. So as you can see, there was so much work and so many people involved in constructing a ship. Now, unfortunately, employee records from the dockyard have not been transferred into the State Archives collection at this time, but we do have plenty of photos of dockyard personnel. And while there were a handful of women working in admin and food service roles, the majority of the employees were male. So please enjoy this selection of photos of the men of the dockyard. And you can see examples of the many different trades and occupations at the dockyard. Some were blue collar. Some were white collar. Some wore overalls. And some wore casual clothes or aprons. And some wore no shirts at all. Some were based in workshops. And some were in the offices. And others spent more time on the vessels. But they all came together to get the job done. So aren't they great images? And you can find even more in our catalogue, and I'll tell you how at the end of the webinar. So now briefly, I want to touch on the broader work of the dockyard, because it just didn't build ships. It could carry out any type of engineering. And some of the general engineering works that the dockyard completed included components for dams, such as this huge spiral casing for the Hume Dam. The dockyard also constructed items for several power stations, steelwork for the Hexham and Bateman's Bay bridges, as well as demountable buildings for schools and offices. On the left, we have a cascade mill, which was produced for the Cobar copper mines, and this was used for grinding ore. And on the right, we have the 3rd section of a condenser bound for the Vales Point power station on the New South Wales Central Coast. And this condenser was so big that it had to be constructed and moved in 4 separate parts. But the 1970s saw a downward trend in shipbuilding. In 1976, employee numbers at the dockyard were reduced from over 2,200 to 1,100, particularly in the shipwright trades. So the last two big ships constructed by the dockyard were the Flinders Range, ship number 95, and the Selwyn Range, ship number 96. And these were both bulk ships constructed for the Commonwealth's Australian National Line. No further orders for large vessels were forthcoming after this time, and a government review in 1977 blamed rising costs, stiff competition from international dockyards, especially those in Korea and Japan, and ongoing industrial action at the dockyard that delayed construction schedules. The employees, on the other hand, blamed the politicians and poor management. At the launch of the Selwyn Range, pictured here, workers hung a protest sign and effigies from the deck of the ship, accusing US President Nixon and Australian Prime Minister Fraser of killing shipbuilding. After 1978, the dockyard was reduced to constructing smaller vessels, such as barges and ferries, and non-ship related engineering. In 1983, the dockyard handed over its last vessel, the ferry Queenscliff. Attempts to secure a submarine building project to bolster the dockyard's future were unsuccessful. And despite protests from employees and submissions from the Newcastle City Council, the New South Wales government announced the winding down of operations in 1986. The closure of the dockyard had a devastating effect on the workers, many of whom struggled to find skilled work in the Newcastle area, which had been experiencing an economic downturn for a number of years. And the dockyard officially closed on the 6th of March 1987, marking the end of an era for large-scale government shipbuilding. The site at Dyke End and Carrington was then put up for public lease. So during its 45 years of operation, the dockyard had played a vital role in Australia's defence and merchant shipping capacity. It had become an integral part of Newcastle's identity as a working class maritime industrial city. It provided thousands of jobs and supported the local economy, and it had trained generations of engineers, tradespeople, and naval architects. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. As you can see, we have a wonderful collection of photos from the dockyard. Over 20,000 images from this series have now been digitised and published in our catalogue. So to search for images yourself, you can go to our website, mhnsw.au, and then select Explore State Archives. In the search box in our catalogue, then enter the series number, which is NRS-21054, and your keywords. So in this example, I've searched for the Princess of Tasmania, but you can search for any terms you like. And you can then sort the results in date order using the date filter on the right-hand side of the page. On your results page, you can click through on any item to view the image and download it for free. But please note that many of the negatives in this series have suffered irreversible damage due to vinegar syndrome, which particularly affects acetate negatives. So in some cases, you may just see a marbling effect across the image, but unfortunately, there are also many images where the damage was very advanced and part of the image has been lost. And digitisation of this series was prioritised due to the risk of further loss to the negatives. So for other records of the dockyard held by us, you can search for agency number AGY-2990 and then look at all the different series that we hold and the date ranges they cover. We also hold apprenticeship registers from the Department of Industrial Relations that list about 300 young men apprenticed to the dockyard during the 1940s and 1950s. And you can go to subjects A to Z, then apprentices to search that index. Now, some dockyard employees may also have a public service employee history card, and you can search for those items in series NRS-12395 and add the person's name in as your keyword search. Well, thanks for listening to this webinar. If you have any questions about the photographic collection or other records of the dockyard, you can contact us per the information on the screen.